Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and in this video we're going to take a statistical look back at what happened in BFA Season 3 Mythic Plus, using my tier list that I made of the Mythic Plus specs as kind of a framing for the discussion. I should note that if you do want to go watch those videos, go do it now. Don't look at this, I guess this is spoilers, so don't look at those rankings, and go watch that video now real quick and then come back and we'll start talking. Okay, so the first way I want to look at the data is, now that we are past the good push week of the season, probably most of the 25s that will be done this season have been done. There may still be a couple on Tyrannical Bursting Skittish Week, but nowhere near as many as were done on Fortified Bursting Volcanic Week, which happened a couple weeks ago. So with those data, let's go take a look at how many unique players of each spec completed a key at plus 25. My data for this, by the way, comes from Radar.io. Some regions don't have their information show up on Radar.io. For instance, the server on which a 26 was done, I think the Chinese servers, isn't scraped by Radar.io, so we don't have data from all regions. So this is just from the regions that have their data on Radar.io. Okay, so my S tier was Outlaw Rogues and Resto Druids. We had 10 Resto Druids do a 25, and 15 Outlaw Rogues, so pretty high numbers, higher than we'll see for almost all of these other specs below them. So I think a pretty good S tier represented there. All right, now let's take a look at the A tier. Brewmasters, 9 of them did a 25, 4 Fire Mages, 13 Havoc Demon Hunters, 1 Assassination Rogue, although the numbers for this are a little bit questionable because there's only one person I knew who actually completed all their dungeons as an Assassination Rogue, but a common strategy for Toldagor was to do the first pull as Assassination. So that number may be a little bit muddled. Similarly for Fire Mage, actually, many of those runs showed up as Frost in Toldagor because for that first pull, people played Frost or Assassination, and then they would zone out and swap afterwards to Outlaw or Fire. But there was one person who completed a full 25 as Assassination at least. And Prot Warriors, 5 of them timed 25s. Okay, let's move on to the B tier. 1 player each for Elemental and Shadow times 25. 4 Whole Balance Druids did though, so perhaps indicative that the spec deserved better than a B tier ranking. No Mistweavers, no Unholies, no Ret Pallies, 1 Solitary Prot Pally, 0 Vengeance Demon Hunters, 2 Fury Warriors actually, and 2 Windwalkers, and 3 Whole Holy Pallies, the only other healer besides Resto Druids to time a 25. Then in the C tier, Beast Mastery Hunters, I did technically put these up in the B tier in the comments of my tier list updated video, but I've decided to just use the image from the video itself for this one, so leaving Beast Mastery there for now. They did have 1 representative time a 25. Outside of that, all of these other specs here had no 25s times. So what can we learn from looking at the data this way? Well, it looks like the tier list is actually pretty good here, pretty accurate, especially at the specs that can time 25s, with a few exceptions, and with a few things that were a little bit weird to see. Like, it's tough to know exactly how good Assassination would be if it weren't for Outlaw, right? So specs like that have better copies of themselves higher on the tier list, that kind of muddies the information. And again, we're playing with a pretty small sample size here, so 1 or 2 people happening to choose a spec can throw the numbers in a big way. But it looks like mostly things were pretty accurate here. All of the S tier specs and A tier specs were represented, most of them pretty heavily, and then most of the B tier specs made it into at least 125 run, and then very little representation below that, which was, I think, to be expected. Okay, so those were the specs that timed 25s. Another interesting way to look at the numbers are to look at what the highest key timed by those other specs were. So let's start off by taking a look at which specs timed 24s. Much of the rest of the B tier in here, along with a smattering of C and D tier specs, although less proportionally than in the higher tiers, so it makes a lot of sense here. Of note, some of these specs, there's only 1 player timing 24s or even 23s for some of them. So Demonology and Enhancement, I think, are good examples of this, where there's like really 1 person who's doing high keys at all in them, and then everything else is maybe 22 or below. Next, let's take a look at the specs that have done a 23 or higher. Those include Ret Pally, Vengeance DH, Marksmanship Hunter, Destro Lock, and Resto Shaman. Again, a couple of these specs, there's only 1 person who's done it, but some of them there actually are quite a lot of people doing 23s on, so pretty healthy. And again, weighted more towards, like, of the remaining B tier specs now, all of them have finished, whereas there are still some empty spaces in the C, D, and F tiers. Closing out that C tier, we have the 22s. All of the remaining C tier specs, along with 1 spec each in D and F, have done a 22. Although again, Frost, a little bit hard to be sure of here, because there are some Toldagor runs showing up as Frost that are higher than 22, but only that dungeon, and I think most of those, the players then swapped out back to Fire after that first pull. Finally, closing out the D tier, Survival and Arcane have both timed a 21, and Affliction Warlock has timed 20. So again, analysis from this frame looks pretty good for the tier list. Looks like a pretty robust measure of relative success of specs and high keys. You know, there are a few specs here that are a little bit different than where you'd expect given their placement in the tier list. Specs like Disc and Demo having time to 24 are outliers for sure. But for the most part, you know, there's a lot of the 25s at the top, and then it slowly descends as you get further down the tier list. Okay, the next way I want to look at things is unique class representation at a 20 or higher. So this again comes from Radar.io. This is the number of players that have done a 20 or higher as each spec. Not the total number of runs, but the total number of players. The most popular spec by this metric is Outlaw Rogue at 14% of all players who've done a 20 or higher, so pretty high. Then Havoc Demon Hunter at 12, and Wrestler Druid at 11. Wrestler Druid at 11 is actually pretty huge because there's only 20 total points to be split among the healing specs, of course, because a healing spec is 1/3 of the group, so that's 20 out of 100. Then we get to our first tank spec, again 20 points split among the tanks. 7 of those go to Brewmaster. Then 5 points each for Fire, Balance, Fury, and Prot Warrior. 4 points to Beast Mastery. 3 points each to Assassination, Elemental, Shadow, Holy Pally, and Prot Pally. 2 points to Vengeance and Windwalker. And then all of the other specs earn either 1 or 0 points. So looking at these numbers in the 20 and higher key range, again, looks pretty favorable for our tier list. We have 25 of the 100 points split among our 2 S tier specs, and then 32 of them among our A tier specs. And then most of the remaining points are in the B tier, with just a couple smattered in the C and D and F tiers. Now let's take a look at what happens if we lower the threshold for our analysis down to 15 keys or higher. In this level range, there are a lot more specs that are seeing play. The most popular spec is a lot less popular than in the 20 and higher range, and it's actually Havoc Demon Hunter in this range with only 9%. Then we get to our Wrestler Druids and Outlaw Rogues at 8 and 6%. And the specs with 5% representation, Balance, Fury, and Beast Mastery. So this brings up an interesting point about Beast Mastery Hunters, right? Beast Mastery Hunter is one of the 6 most popular specs, but we saw very little representation of them in those 25 keys, right? Only 1 Beast Mastery Hunter did a 25. This actually makes me feel a little bit less bad about placing them in C tier initially, given that there are so many people trying to play this spec and playing them in the lower keys. The fact that so few of them have then converted that to doing the 25s makes me feel a little bit less bad about putting them below all of the B and A tier specs. Okay, onto the specs with 4% representation. Those are Brewmaster, Assassination, Protection Warrior, and Protection Paladin. Then our 3% specs are Fire Mage, Shadow Priest, Elemental Shaman, Mistweaver Monk, Rep Pallies, Windwalkers, Holy Pallies, and Blood Death Knights. The 2% specs fill out our B tier here with Unholy and Vengeance. And then many of the lower tiers also have a bunch of specs with 2% representation in 15 keys and higher. Again, part of this is that people just want to do keys on their character. So if their character is something they raid on or just something they want to play on, it'll have higher representation in this 15 or higher level than it would in the 20 or higher level. And then there are 3 specs that actually round to 0% representation in 15 keys and higher. Those are Subtlety, Arcane, and Survival. Survival has never been that popular ever since they reworked it in Legion, so it's not surprising to see low representation for it, even if it might theoretically not be that bad. It's just not a very popular spec in PvE. And then Subtlety and Arcane are both specs that suffer from being multiple tiers below other versions of their spec, right? Arcane is 3 tiers below Fire, Subtlety is 3 tiers below Outlaw, so those effects make it much harder, I'd say, for people to play those specs. I hope this analysis of the data has been interesting to you. Let me know in the comments if there's anything you think or any metric you'd like to see me use or anything you disagree with. I do like to discuss those sorts of things, of course. Look forward as well in the near future to a video coming out with my predictions for how these specs are going to move as we move into patch 8.3. Remember to like and subscribe and check out my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/Dratnos. Thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you in the next one.